Welcome, welcome, welcome once again to another episode of the talk show. I'm Jason Takhtadjian, and today we are joined by a very, very special guest. His name is Jack Topalian. Jack, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing fantastic, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's good to be with you.
Absolutely. I mean, you have been very busy recently. You have recently been featured as being one of the stars on season three of Euphoria that recently released its first episode of season three. And I
hmm
wanted to just kind of talk to you about that first because I'm sure that that has been quite the experience for you to be traveling around, going to these film premieres and just experiencing everything, even today.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride. We filmed Euphoria last year. I started, I think, sometime in May or June, and then we took a little, at least my character took a break. Then I came back and I did a couple of months, August, September, part of October, and then I we traveled, and then I came back and I did some more stuff in November. So it's been a pretty amazing ride, man, and I can't wait to see how it all turned out. I come on episode two, which is this Sunday at 9 o'clock on HBO, 9 p.m. PST. So my character makes his debut this Sunday. So.
That is awesome. Do you have any plans for watching episode two? Like, do you have any plans as far as watching that episode with anybody or
Well,
anything specific?
we did it as I watched with my kids, and my kids have been huge fans of the show, and they're older in their 20s, so we kind
Mhm.
of had like a little watch party last Sunday, and we're probably going to do the same thing. So it's going to be kind of a family weekly thing.
How cool is that? I mean, tell me about that. I want to kind of like reel it back a little bit. What the support has been like for you and for the show for season three, and kind of what that's been like for you in your career as well.
Well, look, it's one of the top shows I think on HBO ever. I've been a huge HBO fan, from the beginning. I've been fortunate enough to have been on two previous HBO shows. I was on season two of True Detective as a recurring character, and then I was also on Duster, which came out last year as a recurring character as well. So, I've been a huge fan of HBO and everything that they put out there. So the ride's been pretty amazing, and the fact that Euphoria has a global audience,
Yeah.
which is unlike a lot of the shows, because, most of the shows you watch domestically, right? Certain shows. But something like Euphoria is kind of going all over the place. In fact, I felt it when we were traveling. Like I mentioned, I took a couple of weeks off in October. We went to Europe. My daughter was studying in Europe in Florence. So we were in Paris for a week and then in Florence for a week. And believe me, I heard conversations in France and in Italy about Euphoria this, Euphoria that. And then I've seen some of the postings, like on X and other places. So I'm very fortunate to be a part of a great show. I mean, I thank, Sam Levinson and the other producers for picking me and thinking that I would be the right character for this role. And I hope I make everybody proud.
That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to it. And interest of full disclosure, I watched episode one yesterday in preparation, and I'm like waiting for your character, and I'm like, maybe he's gonna come back a little bit later. So I'm glad you said it. That this Sunday, episode two, is when you're gonna make your debut, and
Sunday episode two. Yeah.
I'm sure the Armenian community is gonna be really excited as well to see another Armenian face on a TV show as big as Euphoria as well. So I was gonna ask you too, just what that Armenian community support has been like recently, leading up to the release of Euphoria, and what it's been like to get that love from so many different pe places in the Armenian community, not just Southern California.
You know, to be honest with you, I felt the love from the Armenian community for a very long time. Obviously, I've been doing this, for I don't know, about 10, 12 years, being in the mainstream market as an actor, writer, director. But I've also, prior to that, I did a couple of Armenian telenovela shows, if you will. So
Ooh,
the community, especially in Los Angeles, and I would say probably abroad, because they show a lot of those Armenian telenovelas in Armenia and in Europe. So they knew who I was prior to me transitioning into the mainstream.
for sure.
So I've always felt the love of the community, and obviously with Euphoria being as big as it is, I'm feeling it a lot more. And everybody's gracious enough to reach out and compliment, or like yourself, just kind of invite me to have like a little chat or like a little Q&A, whatever. So I'm always open because I personally love to support other Armenians who are whatever they're doing. They don't have to be in the movie business. Like somebody like Ara Zeta, for example, who's my friend, and you interviewed him recently.
Yes.
He's an amazing chef. He's an amazing guy. He's a
Yeah.
great friend, and he's extremely talented. Yeah, he's not a movie guy, but he's got a story to tell, and he's going to be on this pretty cool show that's coming out soon. So other Armenians that are in this world, of media, I love to support them, and I've been feeling the love back from them.
That is awesome. Yeah, you have been around for more than a decade, and a lot of Armenians in the community, even outside of the Armenian community, know
Yeah.
you and for your work. So, yeah, whenever I ask that question, it's like, everyone knows and is familiar with you, but now seeing you on Euphoria season 3, seeing how popular that show was when it first released, and even today, I think that's kind of it's really cool for the Armenian community to see somebody that we are familiar with and see him more mainstream. I think that's what it really comes down to, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean this show, like you said, it took a hiatus for about 3, 4 years from season two, and this season it takes a time jump, so it takes place 5 years later, as you saw in episode one. So everybody's an adult now, they're living in the adult world with real responsibilities and real consequences. So there's been a lot of anticipation, and again, it's not just the Armenian community, obviously. They're near and dear to my heart, but I'm a mainstream actor. I'm a character actor. I play all types of characters, and I get recognition, here and there once in a while, and I have a feeling that I may get a little more recognized after Euphoria. So,
I have a really good feeling about that too. I think that's going to happen as well, just because of, again, just how big the show is and how, it gets so many people's attention. And I
right.
wanted to talk to you a little bit about, just your career and kind of take a step back because, you started, and correct me if I'm wrong, you started acting in your 30s or 40s, correct?
In your 40s,
In your
actually in my early
40s.
40s. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So I want you to take us back a little bit. Just talk to me about just what your life was like before acting. If I'm not mistaken, you were in the Bay Area, correct? And some
Yeah.
things happened, and that's what kind of led you to pursue acting.
It all kind of happened accidentally, but just to go back, my family and I immigrated to the United States in 1977. My father loved the Bay Area because he had been to the US before. He loved the Bay Area, buildings, streetcars. It's a pretty amazing city, San Francisco and the Bay Area. So we settled there. I grew up there, high school, college, and then I opened a business. I was in the construction and real estate industry. So for many, many years, that's what I've done. And I got married, had 3 children, 3 beautiful children who are now in their 20s, like I mentioned. And the accent and the acting thing didn't really happen. It wasn't something that I set out to do when I was younger. I mean, I played music professionally in my late teens and early 20s, but I didn't pursue that. When I went into business, I kind of put that aside. But when I was, my kids showed some interest in acting and in the media, and so I would take them on auditions, and every time I would go, casting directors would ask me, "Hey, you got a kind of a cool look. Have we seen you in anything? Are you an actor?" So after a few times of like hearing this, I mean more than a few times, I would say, I decided that I wanted to do something about it, and I said maybe I have something, but I wanted to study it. So I enrolled in ACT, American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco,
Yeah.
as well as Stanford Drama. And then I started taking it seriously while I was running a business, while I had 3 children, my wife and I, and a family. So I did that, as kind of a thing to just to get into. And then I realized that I really love it. And
Yeah.
then it kind of turned into a full-time thing.
What is that kind of like? You're practicing lines while trying to run a construction company and getting dinner ready when you're like, hey, I gotta get this taken care of.
It's insanity, man. It's insanity. I mean, it's like, hey, I gotta like learn my lines, but you gotta put the kids to bed and everybody, and then I kind of have to go into because my home, I have a home office, so it's always kind of like my you know my space, if you will. So after everybody's kind of done their thing, kids are to bed, my wife was pretty cool, so I'd go in and I would just study my lines, and then I'd be ready for whatever I needed to do. In fact, when I was still in the Bay Area, I had an agent in Los Angeles, and he didn't know that I lived in the Bay Area. I intentionally did not tell him because they would have never taken me on as talent, but I was so committed that I had an 818 phone number on another phone. When he called, he'd say, "Hey, Jack, you have an audition tomorrow at 4 o'clock, right?" Man, I'd book a Southwest flight. I'd go to San Jose, fly to Burbank, rent a car, or call one of my friends or family members and say, "Hey, come pick me up." I would go to the audition, do my thing, and then fly back. So I've been very committed from day one. It's something that I took extremely seriously from day one, which I still do today.
And that's really important whenever you do something that drastic as far as like a career shift or anything shift, right? You have to be very dedicated. And I was going to ask you too, it kind of lends me to my next question. Going from owning a construction business to acting is very, very different, especially for us men in the Armenian community. I mean, did you have support and was there any pushback from anybody that you like was in your life when it was like, what are you sure about this?
Well, I did get a lot of love. I mean, my wife and my kids were very supportive from day one. I mean, obviously, it's a life-changing process. And to this day, I get all the love and support from them directly. My dad, who's kind of old school, and they still live in the Bay Area. My dad, when I said acting, is like, I don't know about this acting thing. What is this? It's like you're changing careers, and like that. And
What are you
which is
doing?
normal, man. It's like it's normal,
Yeah.
and most people are thinking like, who changes directions in life? But I've always been one of these guys that I've always followed my heart. And but I look at it as a business. I'm not just following it just to kind of go in and say, "Oh, I want to be an actor." No, I realize it's a business. I realize that I have to be disciplined. I have to be, prepared. I have to have the studies under my belt. It's no different than being an engineer or being, doing what you're doing. You can't just get on television and start speaking if you
That's true.
don't know what you're doing. You have to be prepared. So I think a lot of the producers and the casting directors realized that I was very committed, which I am to this day, and I take this very seriously. And my agents are always, telling me that, and they're opening doors for me. You know, they create the opportunities, but I have to be able to walk into the room and book the job. Kind of like, like a football coach or a basketball coach. There's only you can train, but then when it's game time, the players have to step up.
Absolutely, absolutely. And all that dedication and hard work, it has continued to pay off for you. But do you remember the first role that you landed and just kind of what that was like, all that work that you put in
Yeah.
to finally get something tangible after that?
Yeah, the very first role after the Armenian thing, because I decided I don't want to do this anymore. I kind of, I said, "Hey, look, I'm going to go in the mainstream market," and that's what my intention was. So the very first role that I booked was a television show called Southland, which ran for many, many seasons. And Ann Biderman was one of the creators. Anyway, they booked me for this role, like a kind of a domestic dispute between husband and wife. It was a small co-starring role, but I remember being on set, and here I am. I'm on set with like C. Thomas Howell and Lucy Liu, and I'm going, Jesus Christ! I watch him on television, and here I am standing right next to him, and it was kind of a surreal experience, but they were the ultimate professionals, and I found like most people in our industry are very professional at that level. So they were very welcoming to me. uh you know they realized that I'm kind of a new guy, if you will, and but it went well. Everybody said look good, and they didn't cut me out of the episode. The episode aired, and there I was. So
That's what matters,
must
right?
have done okay, yeah. So, and that
You
was
take made
the,
the cut.
yeah, yeah, because sometimes you don't make it to in the editing room, they'll chop it up.
Yeah.
And sometimes I understand because some things go longer or whatever, but sometimes maybe it's just the performance wasn't good, so they just
Mhm.
chop it.
Oh my gosh, that is so interesting.
Luckily for that one, I made the cut.
That is awesome. I mean, does this do you still get starstruck by some people, or has that worn off as more time progresses and more time you're on these sets?
Well, I don't know if it's starstruck, but I'm always excited to meet, new people.
Yeah.
I'm always excited to meet, like, I did a movie with Denzel Washington, a few years back, and he's one of my all-time favorite actors. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Oh,
He's
you're
one of
good.
my all-time favorite actors, and I've watched pretty much every movie that Denzel has made.
Hmm.
So, meeting him for the first time, you're always in awe of someone, but at the same time, you come to the realization that he's just another person. He's a human
Yeah.
being. And and they extend the respect, and you give the respect back to them, and it becomes kind of a normal. At some point when you book a particular job and you're on set, the understanding is, listen, you've done your due diligence, if you will. You've done the work. Now you belong here with us on an equal basis.
Yeah.
He is the star, there's no question about it, but at the same time, when you're doing a scene together, you're kind of on an equal basis. But I still am excited to meet new people. Like when I met Jacob Elordi for the first time, and I met Sydney Sweeney, I met Maud Apatow, and I mean, we've been seeing these young people, they've become stars now, but they're very humble and they're very grounded and they're very welcoming. So that's the part that I really enjoy, honestly.
That's awesome. I'm glad you brought up Sydney Sweeney. She's one of the stars of Euphoria. But something I learned maybe as early as a year ago is her ties with the Armenian community, and specifically training with Gokor and doing judo at Hayasan MMA, freestyle MMA.
That actually came out of a conversation. So we're doing a scene, Sydney and I are doing a scene together, and we're kind of sitting in the car. There's a lot of downtime. They got to move the cameras around. And then I said, "Hey, Sydney, congrats on the boxing movie. That she's got a movie, which is, I think, the number one movie on HBO right now. So shout out to Sydney and her film." And I said, "Hey, what was that like training, to become a boxer, playing a real life boxer and all that?" She said, I actually studied some of this martial arts stuff. And I said, but who? And then she turns to me like point blank and says, Hayastan Fighting Club with Sensei Gokor Chivichan. And I said, hold on a minute. Did you just say Hayastan? Because Hayastan obviously is
Right.
Armenia. And she said it with no accent. And I said, I know Gokor because my kids took judo with them. And I know Gokor personally. He's been to one of my film's premieres and so forth.
Yeah.
So he's kind of a legend in the MMA world. And Oleg Takhtadov, who's also a friend of mine, was in one of my films, trained with him, and a lot of other people. So she says, yeah, I studied with him for like 9 years or something, up until 18 or 19 years old. So that was the grounds, and I was like, wow. So she had this
Wow.
big tie to the community, which was pretty cool to find out.
That is so interesting to find out because you think of Sydney Sweeney, you think of, just a beautiful woman that's acting and just doing everything, and she's everywhere. She's just about everywhere. And then all of a sudden we find out that there's an Armenian tie, and it's Gokor and once again,
And she knows
Hayastan MMA.
a few words in Armenian too. By the way, so does Alexa Demi. Alexa
Really?
Demi. Oh yeah, Alexa. She's hilarious, man.
Oh my
Oh
God.
my gosh.
Does she know the good words or the bad words or both?
I'm just gonna kind of leave it to the imagination, but
Okay,
I
fair
said, "How do
enough.
you know this stuff?" Is one day she comes up to me and we're like talking, and she says, "Say this, say that" in Armenian, right? Because my character is an Armenian in this show, and I have a few lines in Armenian. And I said, "Alexa, how do you know this?" She says, "I grew up in Glendale."
Ah,
I said, "Okay."
there you go.
So,
That's
she
that's
had
what
that
ties it all
Glendale
together.
connection. That's
That
pretty
is so
cool, man.
interesting. That is so
Pretty cool.
interesting. And
You
it's
know?
really cool. Once again, it just highlights, like as us Armenians, there might be some people who might be critical of us, right? And they're like, "Oh, why are you trying to like make everything Armenian?" Well, we're not, but at the same time, we're proud of our, heritage, and we're proud that, we're a small group of people, but we still have such a big influence in any space, whether it's journalism here or acting for you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Armenians, we've been around for a very, very long time. You're right. But one of the advantages that I think Armenians have always brought to any society, because, we obviously, a lot of us live in the diaspora. And as you know, Los Angeles and Fresno and other parts of the world have large Armenian diasporas, but we assimilate into the society. We bring we bring our own culture and then we intermix with other cultures, and that's one of the things that I love about living in Los Angeles is the mixture, of all these different cultures and ethnicities. And it's pretty cool, especially when you go to restaurants and stuff. Like you could have like a Mexican Armenian fusion kind of a thing, and it's really cool. But I think you're right. Armenians, we've been around for a long time. We are everywhere. We do a lot of things, not just acting, not just journalism, I mean, look at somebody like Kirk Kerkorian.
That's
He
right.
was flying over the Atlantic, taking supplies for the US troops during World War II, and then he kind of was instrumental in taking Las Vegas to the next level. I mean, we've had inventors and, philosophers and teachers and all kinds. So we're people just like everyone else. We're not special. And sometimes, it's important for us to understand. I think humility and humbleness is an important thing. We have a lot of things to present to the world, but so do other cultures. And it's important for us to listen to other cultures and learn from them, and vice versa. And us to be able to teach our culture to others as well. And, that's one of the reasons that I really love being in the film industry is it gives us an opportunity to be able to maybe tell our stories from our own perspective if we can.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you, and I'm fortunate enough that I went through schooling from first grade to 12th grade through the International Baccalaureate program while I
Mhm.
was in growing up in Las Vegas, and that was just kind of like it helped me be a world learner, but also helped me be exposed to so many different walks of life that otherwise, if we stay in this Armenian sphere, we won't really know what else is going on in the world.
No, exactly. And you got to get out of that.
Yeah.
Like, look, the other day I was doing an interview and somebody asked me, dude, is it difficult for you to be an Armenian in Hollywood? And I said, no, I've never felt it. First of all, I'm just a person. No one ever says, hey, Armenian guy. No one ever says that. When that, like I have a character, I've played very many different ethnicities, Russian, Hispanic, Israeli, Greek, whatever, Italian, right? So I'm an actor playing a particular role. And then once I'm on set, people get to know me. We're sitting around. There's a lot of hurry up and wait on movie sets, obviously. We film like for half an hour and then we're waiting for 3 hours because there's a lot of setup time, right? But you start talking with people and they get to know you, you get to know them. And I have never not told anybody that I'm Armenian. Everyone that knows me, has worked with me, knows that I'm Armenian, and I'm extremely proud of my heritage. But I'm an American. I grew up in America. This is my country.
Yeah,
My homeland is Armenia. And I'm very proud of that fact and all the accomplishments. But it's important for me to also learn from others. So
absolutely.
I've never, found any difficulty, whether in my previous businesses or in this, in Hollywood. And I haven't encountered any obstacles, if you will. The fact that I'm Armenian, it's stopping me from going anywhere. No, the only thing that stops me is if I'm not prepared and I'm not disciplined and I'm not going to be able to do the job. And that has nothing to do with me being Armenian or not.
Hmm.
And
I
once I'm
agree.
and once I get on a set and I'm representing, then I'm proud. And then people that know me, and if I do a good job, they'll remember the fact that my ethnicity is Armenian, and that makes me even more proud.
Wow. And that's ultimately what matters, right? End of the day, you said it. We're American. I was born in the United States,
Mhm.
to Armenian parents, and I'm proud of my culture too. But
Of
yeah,
course.
I'm American first and foremost, and like you said, it's good to be able to be that type of person that can assimilate because I think ultimately that's the long-term way to get more recognition of our Armenian culture and also have more respect overall. Because if you impose ourselves, then no one's gonna listen.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons, like when I first came to LA and I went into the film industry, and I booked, like I was mentioning, my first job or two, but I also made a film. I wanted to make films as well on my own. And I have other projects, in the works. Like
Wow.
one of them is about an Armenian American family living in Glendale that has ties to Armenia back and forth. And the reason I'm pursuing something like this is because it's important for us to be able to tell our stories, from our perspective. But at the same time, it's got to be a mainstream story. It can't just be, in a small circle that only we will understand. No, it's got to be a story about a family that lives here,
Hmm.
which is based on an existing IP, by the way, and it's based on a previous project of mine that it's gone global, believe it or not.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, 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 it's pretty amazing because a lot of people are like, I read comments and it's sold in over 100 countries, the project, and people are resonating to it because it speaks to them. Forget the fact that it's Armenian, it's on a human level. And I think we can present those types of things where everyone will be able to watch. Like, I love watching foreign content. I mean, I watch Korean movies, I watch Japanese movies, I watch French and German and Italian movies. I mean, what's wrong? I mean, it's good entertainment, it's good storytelling. Why shouldn't I watch it, right? And it could be the reverse for us, in my opinion.
I
So,
100%, I 100% agree. I was taught that early on in my journalism career, actually, to a different extent, because I wanted to cover the Armenian genocide while I was
mhm.
in Sioux City, Iowa, when I was the only Armenian
Wow.
there. So it
Right.
was like, okay, how do I make the audience here care or tie it to them? So
Exactly.
that was the mindset that was presented to me by the news director. He's like, you can care about this all you want, and I'm not saying anything against that, but you got to think about the audience. You got to think about who this is for, and it has to be done for, an audience that maybe doesn't know about this. So how do you present it in a way that's digestible?
Well, it's like when you watch a good film or a TV series, and there are certain characters you gravitate towards. There's that, familiarity with that particular character, that storyline. You kind of see maybe yourself or somebody that's kind of, even though there may be, that guy may be French and you're Armenian, but the story takes place in such a way that you're going, oh, wow, man, this is, it's speaking to me and I'm understanding this and I could really understand this person's journey. I mean, the perfect example of that was what? My Big Fat Greek Wedding. It
Hmm.
was made about a Greek family, and
Yeah.
their son-in-law was going to be a non-Greek, but it was made on a modest budget, but it went global and multiple spin-offs. But the fact of the matter is, whether you were Hispanic, whether you were Armenian, Asian, whatever your ethnicity was, you could relate to that because the story was funny, was relatable, the characters were real. There was a lot of things going on, man, and it was like, wow. And I still love to watch that, and it's funny as that.
It's timeless. That's for
It
sure.
is timeless. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jack, speaking of things that are timeless, unfortunately, this show is not timeless and we're running out of time. So just like one last note that you want to leave everyone else on, just, whether it's about Euphoria or any of your projects, any personal projects that you have coming up as well.
Well, like you said, thank you. First of all, I appreciate you taking the time, Jason. It's been a pleasure. I didn't realize that how much time has passed, but we got to talking. But Euphoria started last Sunday and it repeats every Sunday, 8 episodes. My character appears this Sunday at 9 p.m. on HBO. And when Euphoria ends, I have a recurring series role on Apple TV Sugar with Colin Farrell. So that gets picked up that starts in June. I think early to mid-June. So right after Euphoria ends, that's going to start. And in between that, I'm doing other projects, and I have this one project that I just mentioned that I'm working on.
Yes.
It's in pre-production right now, so we're getting a lot of support and love for it, and we'd love to see it come to light. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time, taking your time to chat with me, and I really appreciate it. I hope to meet you in person one of these
I
days
would
soon.
love
And
that.
best of luck with everything else with Euphoria. I can't wait to see you in season 2 and beyond.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be with you, and best of luck. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.